Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Luath press event. The People's Game After COVID, the Future of Scottish Football. Just to introduce myself, I'm Simon Barrow, and I'm co-editor with Jerry Hassan of the book Scotland After the Virus. And that has, amongst other things, a chapter on Scottish football in it. For my day job, I'm the director of Ecclesia, which is a think tank about beliefs and politics and ethics. And I'm also the co-founder, as it happens, of the Scottish Football Supporters Association. And my colleague Paul Goodwin is one of the contributors this evening. And we're very grateful to the Scottish Football Supporters Association for co-sponsoring this event. SFSA is a fans union. You can join free, and actually the website we popped into chat. So that's a little bit about me. There's just a small bit of housekeeping before we move on to the main event and I introduce you to our fantastic panel. The first thing to say is that this is being broadcast live on Twitter and on YouTube. And in fact, the whole programme plus some excerpts will be put up on the Luath Press YouTube probably next week. If you are following on Twitter or want to tweet about this now or afterwards, the hashtag is SATVbook. That's the hashtag for the event. And there's also a discount code for the book, which I'll say a bit more about this evening. And that means you can get a special discount on the book, £2.99 off this evening only. So that's our thank you to you for giving up a Friday evening and being part of this event and conversation. The other thing to say is that everybody who isn't on the panel does have their video and turned off and also muted. Please don't take offence to this. It's not that we don't love you. It's just that for copyright reasons, because this is being broadcast, we need to be able to do that. But when we move into the question and answer after some initial presentations, then you'll have the opportunity to contribute. I'll bring as many people in as I possibly can. So that's a little bit about how it'll work this evening. And just to say about the book, because obviously football is one dimension of this, but really Scotland After the Virus is a book which isn't just commentators talking about big policy issues, but very importantly, Jerry and I wanted to involve the sort of cultural aspect of life as well. There's some great poetry and short stories in it as well. And we hope it gives some sort of signs for the future. What after the virus means is something we're all trying to work out at a personal level as well as at a national and international level. But we hope that this book gives some signals for the future. And of course, the conversation this evening particularly is about football and Scottish football in particular and where we might be going in that. So without further ado, to introduce our panel, and I'll introduce them all and then they'll speak in turn. First of all, Paul Goodwin, as I mentioned, is CEO and co-founder of the Scottish Football Supporters Association. Paul's a marketing specialist. He's helped many clubs to negotiate fan engagement and also community ownership. He wrote the chapter on football in Scotland After the Virus with me, and very importantly, in May this year, his next book, How to Buy and Run a Football Club, A Fan's Guide to Community Ownership, will be published by Luath Press. Luath really getting into the football action there. So Paul, welcome to you. Then Margo Mccaig is an award-winning producer and writer and filmmaker. She's a member of the Scottish Government's Women and Girls in Sport Advisory Group. She's got long involvement with the women's game and with the broadcasting of the game, and many of us will know her from her fabulous films, including the ones about Jock Stein and Jim Baxter and Tommy Burns. So again, great to have you with us this evening, Margo. Then our next speaker will be Hannah Bardell, and Hannah is the MP for Livingston. And she was also SNP spokesperson for digital culture and media and sport from 2018 to 2019. She's heavily involved in Livingston FC. She's very much involved with the women's game. And some of us will also remember her tremendous skills at Keepy Uppy, which were demonstrated live in the House of Commons at one point, to the delight of many of us, though I think perhaps not the speaker. But that was a landmark event in Scottish football. So Hannah, great to have you with us. And then we're delighted also to have David Goldblatt here. David, of course, is a very well-known writer about football. The Ball is Round, A Global History of the Game. He's written about money in football, and he also contributed to another book along with Jim Spence that Jerry Hassan and I put together in 2019, Scotland the Brave. He wrote about money and the game. He's written about Brazilian football. He's written about football in a place called England, apparently, and he's also, very importantly, recently written about sport and the climate emergency. And then last but definitely not least is my colleague Jerry Hassan. Jerry, of course, is a very well-known Scottish commentator. He looks at modern history at the University of Dundee. And in fact, he has an article coming up in the Sunday National this weekend on the theme that we're talking about this evening. We'll hear a bit more from Jerry later as well. But I'm going to kick off by with our short initial comments from Paul Goodwin. And Paul, at present, football in Scotland is being played without fans. And I wondered if you could say, what does that mean? And what has the pandemic told us about the state of the Scottish game and what we need to confront moving forward?
Thank you, Simon. I think the pandemic has opened up a lot of debate about the Scottish game and a lot of concerns. And I think one of the first words that comes to mind is really concern, stroke crisis. And, the reality is that what it's brought home is that Scottish football is incredibly reliant on the turnstiles, the people who come through the gate week in, week out to support it. And we've known for many years, because at various times the SFA or the SPFL are happy to trot out the figures that more people per head of population in Scotland watch football than pretty much most countries in the world. I believe the last time it was mentioned, only the Faroe Isles and Iceland came anywhere close to us. I think Faroe Islands beat us. But the problem we have is that we're so dependent on those customers. And as fans and supporters, over the years, we've not liked to be called customers. But the reality is, in the cold light of day, customers are what we are. And sadly, we have all the experiences of customers going through the turnstile, but very little of the return in terms of involvement in how the game's structured, how the game's run, and how the game will, more importantly, look in the future. So I think all of those things have been brought together through the pandemic. We've looked at how Scottish football has reacted to it. It's not been very positive. We've had various different crises along the way, including voting scandals, league reconstruction, teams demoted that shouldn't have been demoted. And I obviously would like to say at this time I'm a Partick Thistle fan, so I'm still feeling pain from some of those decisions, along with some of my fellow Hearts fans. But Scottish football hasn't done very well. But this is just really the pandemic putting that into focus. Over the years, many of those issues have been there. And I would say that one of the most important quotes that we always use in fans' presentations is there's two that are well known about fans in football. There's a Jock Stein one: you have the greatest team in the world playing in the greatest stadium, but without fans it means nothing. And more importantly to us, in some respects, is a Bill Shankly one, which is maybe less well known, when he talks about the Holy Trinity. The Holy Trinity being the players, the manager, and the fans. Nothing else matters. And unfortunately, those three elements, the players, the managers, coaches, and the fans, have no say in how the game in Scotland is run. But that is a universal problem that fans face across the globe, and that's something we want to address.
Great, thanks very much, Paul. I mean, that gives a very succinct idea of where we are. And indeed, that quote from Bill Shankly is at the beginning of our chapter. And we kind of look at how that begins to pan out. So I'm going to bring in Margo next. So Margo, you look at life from a Glasgow perspective, and also as a filmmaker and writer, and have a passionate interest in the women's game. I'm wondering how things are looking from your point of view.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Paul. We might cross over a little bit in our chat here. I think the first thing I want to say about understanding football in Glasgow, I think indeed anywhere else in Scotland, is it's not an isolated part of life, it's a way of life. And I think this is because the game is in essence, it's an identity. It's woven into our social fabric. We don't just fall in love with a team. We fall in love with a culture and a community, and that in a sense becomes our way of life, which is fortunately or unfortunately a lifetime commitment. I'm a Celtic fan at the moment. We're not getting divorced, but you know, when things aren't going well, you do want to ask for improvements. But I think culturally, I have to draw on my own experiences. And when I go back to when I was a kid, home match Saturdays, I mean, that was a family ritual. And I think that was a ritual that was mirrored across the community. You know, you'd begin the day poring over the back pages of the newspapers, because in those days, that's when you found out who was in and who was out. No social media then. And I think there was a sense that this was a shared experience, going back to that whole essence. It's part of our identity. That culture identity was nuanced, but it was familiar. So football, no matter who you supported, and you know, there's some big teams in Scotland, it was about tradition, superstitions, emotions. You know, there's sorrow, there's joy, there's high, there's lows, there's heroes, there's villains, and memories are shaped and solidified. And it's not just for that 90 minutes, but on the journey to the ground and the conversations that occur, you know, before and after the game, and debates that linger on long after any 90 minutes of football are over. And I do want to refer again to that quote from Jock Stein, because I think in this context of speaking about Glasgow culturally, it is very important, you know, when he did say that without fans, football is nothing. But I think previously, prior to COVID anyway, I think we would have nodded and understood that in the context of fans being this 12 person. You know, you think of Glasgow, there's all these iconic stadiums, and back to the Gunnels, you know, at Firhill, I've got to say that for Paul, and Celtic Park, Ibrox, Hampden, you know, even Cathkin, obviously before Lanark very sadly went out of business. You know, the future of football now, I think we have to repurpose that message. You know, the Holy Trinity, I see it slightly differently, in the sense I see this 3-pillar strategy where football has kind of been built on the basis of people, of place, of business. And I think with people, we count both fans and players within that. And I think each of them has its own hunger. They've got their own demands. But in the context of COVID, obviously that's changed, because for people, there's suddenly a different shape, there's a different space, stadiums are empty, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So you've got to ask, where does that leave us? And I guess it's a pretty dark place for some clubs. But if you look at it in a more broader context, I think it leaves us with an opportunity. You know, I think we have to look at a way forward that isn't so reliant on match day numbers, however beautiful that cultural tradition that I've been brought up is. We need to go back to the basics. We need to strip football back, and we need to try and understand how we can move forward in a way that equates to this economically challenged environment that people are going to have to live in. You know, people have got a different economical infrastructure now. And I think in order to do that, we can look to women's football. I haven't mentioned the other famous football club in Glasgow, and that's Glasgow City. And I think that's a club that's my wee buzzer to tell me I'm nearly out of time. Glasgow City's created an ideology, a pathway for women and girls, and it's not built of generational legacy. It's not connected to a powerful arena. It's a business model that's been sustained without a fan base that empowers it from a business perspective. So let's look beyond what we've looked at before and look at a future that's a wee bit more equal and it's a wee bit more accessible, but starts from something that can deliver as a new cultural tradition.
Great, thanks very much for that, Margo. And really important to be reminded that though the game means a lot to us passionately, and we have fans of different clubs here, you Celtic, Paul supports Partick, I've been involved with Dumbarton for a long time. We're going to move to the east of the country in a minute with Hannah, and then down south with David. It matters to us very much as a game, but it's also a cultural industry. It's part of the social fabric. It's part of community life, or really could be. And in spite of the difficulties, there are opportunities there. So thanks very much for that. Going to move on to Hannah next. Of course, Livingston FC fan who actually has a cup final coming up, which is going to be a very different, perhaps rather difficult experience this weekend, as well as involvement in the women's game. Hannah, how are things looking for you?
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. And a perfect segue from what Margo was just talking about in terms of the women's game. And yeah, we've got a cup final. Livy, I've got a cup final this weekend. I'm showing my true colours here. And as somebody who worked at the club as well, I guess I've seen the inside of a football club, you know, frankly from behind the bar and behind the reception desk. But I worked for the club from 2001 to 2005. So I was there when we won the cup final, the CIS Cup in 2004 against Hibs. And, you know, the club has been through, like many clubs in Scotland, some really, really tough times. And I think the work that Paul's doing and others on writing about and assessing, you know, who owns a club? How do you do proper due diligence? How do we manage all of those things is something that has been an issue well before the pandemic, but has really come into focus because, like you said at the beginning, the unsustainability of clubs, you know, a light has been shone. And I know from, you know, my own experience at Livingston that, you know, there was a sustainable model, and that model was built around events and catering. Now, all of those sectors have taken a massive hit during COVID, of course, but you know, I will never forget my boss, Alison Ross, who now works at Falkirk, and she ran that place like a tight ship. We had weddings, we had events, we had corporate stuff. We also had a nightclub as well, the Livy Night Spot. There might be some folk on here that remember the Livy Night Spot and the sticky floors, and I've collected a few glasses in my time from there. But nonetheless, you know, it was a model that worked. You know, football doesn't pay for itself, and clubs don't pay for themselves because of the way that it's been set up and frankly the imbalance of the big clubs versus the smaller clubs, and that's been an issue as well in terms of how the money has come down, the fact that elite sport, of course we all want to see football on our TVs, but let's not forget in Scotland that the women's elite clubs are not back. That's a huge issue, and I've had you know, I'll be honest, I'm in touch with some of the Scotland players, the women's team, and you know, some of them went out and had to play for their country recently and hadn't actually played matches, you know, and that's grossly unfair. And there are some issues around that I'm taking up with my colleagues in the Scottish Government and with the SFA. But, you know, we had a huge opportunity after the World Cup last year in France, which, you know, Margo and we were all talking at the beginning, we're still greeting at the thought of that match against Argentina. I will never forget how I felt that, and I was back from France, I went out for the England match, and it was just heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. But what they achieved and what they did was so incredible. It was such a huge moment for supporters of, you know, I think of all sports, you know, actually in Scotland. And I have to say, I think we failed to capitalise on that after the World Cup for, you know, various reasons. But I think a lot of that has to be laying at the door of the SFA, frankly, and the failure to understand that, you know, the women's game has a different culture around it, yes, but I know from speaking to the women's team that they want to see men's football do just as well as women's football, you know, and I know I've been guilty of it myself, of saying, oh, it's the first time that any Scotland team, men's or women's, got to a World Cup and all the rest of it. And actually, you know, they want to see structures that are sustainable for, you know, both men's and women's football, but for community football, for the grassroots. And all through it. And I think some of that also tied into our media. I mean, I started my career working for STV, editing football highlights for Scott Sport, which was in the dungeons of the old Renfield Street building. And it was a real baptism of fire, but it was a fascinating experience to see how, you know, a sports programme was put together, but also, you know, what the fans felt about it. And that's what all of this is about at the end of the day, is how we engage with our fans, because yeah, football is nothing without it, and without them and without all of you. And I think for too long, clubs are guilty of it to an extent, but certainly the senior executives in football of just not listening and not taking an interest and not engaging. And there's not a need for that, you know, because there's no reason why we cannot have better lines of communication. And that's why, you know, I've joined the Scottish Football Supporters Association to be part of that, because, you know, as a fan myself, I've seen the power and the impact of individual and collective fans coming together to support a club. Or indeed, I will never forget fans approaching Massoni in the Livy car park when he was totally doing over the club and doing over the supporters, you know, and it was largely down to the fans that took him on, you know, that he went. But that's a sorry state of affairs for things to get to. So I think as we as we come out of the pandemic, being able to reflect on, the impact and the opportunities as well of bringing people together digitally, because we've been able to do that. And I think people are living their lives obviously in all sorts of different ways, but the devastation, I think, particularly for mental health, and I know we have lots of female football fans out there, but the reality is still the vast majority of people that go to football matches are guys. And the mental health impact, particularly on the male population. And I know just from speaking to guys in my local community who football is such a big part of their life as well, and the isolation and the issues around mental health for the male population, that not being able to have that routine of the human contact that you have going to matches and everything around it has had a really profound impact. So I think there needs to be a really serious recognition of that, and a discussion about how, as we come out of it, that we are engaging with fans and making sure they're part of the discussion of how we get fans back into clubs through the turnstiles, but also how we make sure there's a positive future for everybody who's involved in football at whatever level.
Thanks very much indeed, Hannah, and thanks for focusing on the community aspect and the fans, and also for being a member of Parliament who has real hands-on involvement in the game. I think that's really, really important to be able to combine those kind of perspectives. Folks, before I move on to David, just to say that I'm sure there are lots of questions and issues coming up in your minds as you listen to these initial comments from our panel. Please do use the chat function to pop comments in. That means that I can pick up on them when we get to the Q&A bit of it. But I'm now going to move on to David. We're delighted to have David Goldblatt with us. As I said, David's written from a global perspective about the game, including the issues of sport and climate change recently, about Brazil, about England and so on. Scotland is a very particular part of the football universe, but David, I'm wondering how you're seeing things in the light of the pandemic, both the challenges and the opportunities.
Well, in the light of the pandemic, what I think is you have to take what scientists say really seriously. You have to believe the worst case scenario can happen. If you manage to get away from the COVID headlines, I'm sure you'll be aware the news on the climate emergency is absolutely catastrophic. The scale of the news coming our way is unbelievable. So for Scotland, for football, for everywhere, for every sport, for every kind of institution, social and cultural practice after this thing, is over, is climate change, and the climate emergency has to be at the heart of absolutely everything. Scottish football, Scottish sport included. Why is this, and why is this even sort of worth worrying about? I mean, it's worth noting Scotland and Scottish football is not going to be hit by problems of 45 and 50 degree centigrade days the way the Australian summer calendar is going to be, which is going to make cricket completely impossible in India and Australia, or grassroots football in Ghana in 30 years, nor is it going to suffer from drought like South Africa and South African cricket, but serious problems are coming. I mean, golf in Scotland is in a situation where the RNA thinks that at least 1/3 of links courses will be unplayable in 30 years from now. Extreme weather comes with rising temperatures, and I think the levels of storms and rain and flooding that are coming to Scottish sports facilities are going to make a really significant impact on their playability. I mean, Arbroath, I think they're in trouble when it comes to rising sea levels. They're in trouble as it is. Winter sports in Scotland, forget it. There's no future. It's all over by 2040. It's not happening in the Alps or Colorado by 2050. So, forget that. And, we've seen this. We've seen it's happening right now. This time last year, we thought the environment story of the year was the wildfires in Australia that made at times the Australian Tennis Open unplayable and cricket in Melbourne unplayable. I mean, this is as nothing as to what is coming. So I would just like to put into the pot the idea that Scottish football and Scottish sport needs to be thinking about its climate responsibilities. And it needs to make a commitment to being going carbon zero in the next 10 years. The framework for this exists. It'll be discussed at COP26 this year in Glasgow, the UN Sport for Climate Action Framework. Everybody needs to sign up and needs to go further. Every institution needs to examine its carbon footprint and have a plan for being carbon zero in the next 10 years. We can talk about the technicalities and what that involves and money later on. The point and why it's really important is not that Scottish football in the end, or indeed football as a whole, is responsible for a gigantic carbon footprint. I calculate that global football is maybe 0.25% of carbon output on the planet, maybe 0.8% for the sports industry and sport as a whole. That's kind of Poland or Spain, not inconsiderable, but not the whole solution. But for climate politics to work on the scale and speed we need it to happen, it has to reach every single demographic in society. The idea of carbon zero politics has to be entirely normalized. And very few things have the reach of sport, and even fewer things have the reach of football to get out there with that kind of message to those kinds of constituencies. And finally, if you'll forgive me a little bit of utopian hope in the face of catastrophe, is that climate politics requires hope. The idea we haven't started too late, that we might actually do it. You know, as the great New York Yankees catcher Yogi Berra used to say, it ain't over till it's over. And sport is a rare place, I would say, in a predominantly secular society where people emotionally experience the possibility of hope, of development, of change, of narratives, of last-minute reversals, of turnarounds, of collective action, of raising your game. And corny as it might be, I think there's real potential there. And I would like to imagine, you know, a future for Scottish football, for football globally, for sport globally, where you have a really massive commitment to the transformation of energy use, transportation, food, investment in infrastructure, etc. And we think seriously about what carbon zero in this world will mean in the next decade.
Thanks very much, David. I mean, that's really powerful, and perhaps, you know, puts firmly on the agenda something that just isn't really talked about nearly enough at the moment in Scottish football or football generally. Again, folks, just to say, I won't be able to see you if you stick your hand up. So do stick comments in the chat, questions, you know, anything that you want discussed. There are a few being fed through to me. And so on. I want to bring in, finally, last but definitely not least, my colleague Jerry Hassan. It was a delight to co-edit and work on Scotland After the Virus with Jerry. Jerry's a Dundee United fan, but has a particular interest in junior football as well, goes around to see a lot of junior football. That's something we haven't talked about so much. So Jerry, I wonder if you have any sort of responses to what's been said so far and comments of your own.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Thank you, everyone. And such great comments. Yeah, I just wanted to start by saying that as a Dundee United fan, and a Dundee United fan since I was a teenager, more and more as I've got older, and I've grown even more to appreciate the game and my love of the game. My love of the game is so much more to me than my support of my one team. And I know that's not the experience of lots of fans. But I feel that more and more profoundly, that I'm so much more interested in the fate of our common game in Scotland, and then probably to a lesser extent the world game, than whether my team win or get relegated or win a cup occasionally. And you know, this weekend, as Hannah said, we've got Livingston against St Johnstone, and I, as a lover of the game, I revel in the fact that, you know, the stale old menu of Celtic versus Rangers, or you know, Celtic winning their whatever was it the quadruple treble that diminished everyone? I think diminished Celtic. I mean, you know, just, you know, the 10 in a row circus, etc., and all that. And the question I want to pose is, because I don't think I am unique in this, I just think I'm in a minority, is how do we think of our game that is beyond our club and beyond the interests of our club? And how do we think of our game and its future beyond the stranglehold of the Glasgow 2? And so I've just got 2 points on this, really. One is history really, really matters. No one has won the main title in Scotland since 1985. And that never used to be. Scottish football, ever since Queen's Park went into decline as the game professionalised, because they were the dominant force. Celtic and Rangers have been the dominant forces, but the game never used to be so lopsided. If you think of the period after the Second World War, when football across the world had this huge period of popularity, that in the cinema, as working class people sought to forget war and got on with their lives and enjoying themselves. In the 40s and 50s, there was a great period of Scottish football when in the 50s, Hearts and Hibs were the biggest teams in Scotland. I think there's a couple of seasons where I cannot remember where it's Hearts or Hibs, but one of them has bigger average crowds than both Celtic and Rangers. And you also had Aberdeen winning the title. You had Dundee in the early 60s. You have Kilmarnock. There's a whole host of other powerful forces. Celtic, I think, finished 12th one season. That wouldn't be allowed now, in the short-termism. And in the 80s, you had Aberdeen and Dundee United winning the league and being great in Europe. And so I just want to conclude with this kind of brief point. Scotland 1985 is a world away. It's a different bloody country. 1985, the miners' strike is ending. The teachers' strike that we used to go on about for ages that was just starting. And it's Alex Ferguson's Aberdeen, for God's sake, that won the title. Alex Ferguson's Aberdeen. And so I think sport at a top level, let alone any level, without competition is eroding its own ethos, basically. What is it offering people? And so we have to think about how we get out of that stagnation and the same menu. Is that, because Celtic and Rangers won't give away power, is it that they go away? Is it that there's a globalised version of the game that continues, etc., and we have more competitive? But we need more competition because it never used to be like this. And I know this is an argument about monopoly capitalism and so on around the world, and football is a version of that. And David's written, eloquently and brilliantly on that. But it doesn't mean to say we just have to be passive here and put up with it, because, as has already been said by Paul, we have power here. We have power as fans, as customers, as people, normally in a normal season, paying money. So we need to think about that, the power collectively and individually we have.
Thanks for that, Jerry. Again, some important challenges there. Okay, the questions and comments are starting to come in, and so I'm just going to relay a few of those. In particular, there are questions obviously about the economics of the game, which gets to be very important in some of the questions that we're talking about. John Fairley's also said that we're aware of the influence of the old firm in Scottish football. The real question is, how do we break that dominance? And that's a question of economics as well. I know when I sometimes go to visit people down south, I have to explain that Dumbarton's annual player budget is probably their team's monthly bar budget or something like that. The economics of scale are just incredible there. And here's a couple of other comments. Mark Johnson has said, as a general manager of a junior club in Carnoustie Panmure, the chasm in club size is mimicked in junior football ourselves. Lockheed United and Broughty Athletic are all sides winning most of the cups and leagues, so it happens at different levels as well. As I said, the comments are starting to come in thick and fast, but I want to give people perhaps a chance to talk about, money in the game, how we get money in the game, how we get more economic equality to enable a more competitive game. Who wants to have a chew on that one? Paul, can I bring you in on that?
Yeah, sure, Simon. I think, and somebody's mentioned it in the comments, in terms of specifically about Jerry's point about the competitiveness. We are one of the worst countries in the world in terms of the competitive nature of the top flight. And it's why it's so refreshing that for many clubs, like yo-yo clubs, and I know we've yo-yoed in the wrong direction at Partick Thistle in the last few years, some of it for not of our own making, but many of the clubs' fans actually felt more comfortable playing in the Championship because of the nature of the football, the fact you could turn up any week and you didn't know who was going to win. You didn't know, it's that very essence that Jerry spoke about. And him and I were talking the other day about the junior leagues and how you go to a junior game and anything can happen. And that was Scottish football up to that period, probably, by the end of 85, it had disappeared. How we get it back is very, very much a challenge, because we gave away and somebody else mentioned it in the comments, when David Murray kind of come into the second phase of the SPFL. Sorry, my bulb's just gone here. He stopped the home and away gate thing, and that, in actual fact, one mechanism, a bit like in the NFL and the other leagues in America and the various different sports, where you have the draft where the worst team gets the best players. It was a mechanism that allowed Scottish football to have some sort of balance in it. So if Raith Rovers were going to Celtic Park and were going to Ibrox, they were getting half the gate, and it just gave a better balance. And Celtic and Rangers still get the benefit, because they were still able to sign the Jim Baxters, for this example, from Raith Rovers at a competitive fee. So there was lots of other benefits you would have in there, because those clubs were used almost as nursery sides, playing, it's a bit like what they want now with their, their Colt teams. So we gave it away. Ever getting it back again, I would say it's virtually impossible until the structure of the game changes quite dramatically at the top. Because of the voting structure just now, you could have 40 clubs all voting for a radical change or a minor change to the game. But if it doesn't suit Celtic and Rangers, they vote against it, and we're stymied there, stuck forever, going round in circles.
Thanks, Paul. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in. There are a number of comments on that. And John Scott has just said, do we need to think about alternate scenarios for elite level football post-COVID? Is competition now possible in a small league with a well-entrenched duopoly? And then has raised the question, do we need to think about Scottish football within a British elite pyramid? That might raise some interesting questions. So that's one issue that's been raised. And Michael Barley said that Jerry hit the nail on the head, identifying the old firm as a major source of the problem in Scotland. We don't want to say that about the fans of the clubs, including Margo, but the question of how competition can re-emerge is one that's come up. I want to move on. Also, a couple of people have mentioned the women's game, why the women's game has been suspended. Perhaps ask Margo and Hannah if they've got any comments about that, and also the fact that really the women's game was starting to give us hope in Scottish football, certainly at national team level. And I think I've noticed, I started to go along and support the women's national team, and want to go and see women's football. Are there some answers coming from the women's game? Is that one way forward? If either of you or any of the rest of the panel have got a comment on that.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Simon, and Margo alluded to this as well in terms of Glasgow City and what they've created. Because what's interesting, if you look at the elite of the Scotland women's national team, you've far more players from the Scotland women's national team playing internationally than you do necessarily any one time in the men's team. I think I might be wrong. I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. And certainly in my discussions with them, they have experience of, very serious setups, because they're either attached to, in England, other Premier League clubs, men's clubs that they were originally, or they're in the US or Australia who have their own. Women's football in Australia is bigger, in America is bigger than men's football almost, and has been for a very long time. I remember going on tour as a student to Canada, where we were playing against sort of young teenagers who were running rings around us, and we had a Scotland internationalist in our midst, but they were playing at a really serious level from a very young age. But I think the lessons to me that are being learned there is about the grassroots, and Livingston was one of those clubs that did really well because it had a really good youth setup. The youth setups had its challenges in recent years, but also that we are, creating that pipeline. But as somebody's raised, why is it not gone back? Why is women's elite football club at a club level not gone back? Well, it's a very good question, because money's been given to the SFA. But what I have, my sense of it is there's a parochialism about the SFA. You've got a number of people, you know, from the SPFL sitting on the SFA board. It's deeply incestuous, and that is, you know, I'm probably using language that's too strong, but, you know, that I know that others feel the same. So, you know, we have to, and that's a challenge not just for the women's game, but the men's game as well. But when you've got a club like Glasgow City that's produced, I think, 11 or 15 of them, you know, of the most recent internationalists who've gone and played, are playing in the US, Australia and beyond, and in the England setup, you know, that just shows it can be done. It can be done in the women's game. Why is, you know, it's being replicated to a certain extent in the men's game, but why not more extensively
in the women's game? Yeah. Again, Margo, I don't know if you want to come in on those issues, and also, you know, I'm conscious of the fact that you are also a Celtic supporter, and inevitably the old firm gets raised when we look at the economics of the game and so on, and how you feel about those issues that we've been talking about.
I mean, first of all, I'd quite like to make a comment about the women's game, and you know, somebody there did raise, why is the elite game in Scotland being treated differently to the men's game? And I think it's a really legitimate question, and I think we have to really push for an answer, because the one thing about this pandemic is that we're all subject to it. Everybody's at its mercy, and that's men's football and women's football. But why are both sectors not being treated the same? Elite's men's football is allowed to play. Women's elite football isn't even allowed to train, despite the fact that they've outlined, you know, ways in which they can follow the COVID guidelines, which the men are allowed to follow. So I think from that standpoint, you know, we can learn lessons from the women's game, but when they're not being treated as equal partners at the table, I feel really very apprehensive that they're going to be allowed to have a voice, which will in turn then implement change. Going back to the sort of Celtic Rangers, obviously, yes, I'm a fan, and I think that kind of applies to that as well. I think this is the first time that all of football has genuinely been at the mercy of something that has an impact on every single club, albeit each club is dealing with it differently because they've got different levels of financial support and backing and strengths that not everybody has. But at the very least, that should be a cry for change. It should allow everybody to come to the table and say, right, how are we going to deal with this issue to the benefit of the game? Because what happens is, you know, if the smaller clubs fold, then we don't have a game anymore. And I think that equally applies to the women's game as well. So I know that we're kind of looking for positive notes and things, but we are at crisis. And we can't just keep putting it off until we've got a situation where we're more at ease with the pandemic and, you know, day-to-day life is safer. You know, running around in the background to that, there's got to be some kind of strategy that brings us all to a solution that can help, and not just rely on, yeah, it's going to be all right in the night, because let's face it, it's not. We're in trouble.
Indeed. Thanks, Margo. Just to say to David and Jerry, I'm going to bring you back in a minute, but to comment that Graham Stewart said, well said, Hannah, to the comments that you made as well. And Paul Goodwin has come in on the chat and said part of the problem with the SFA is that it's controlled by the SPFL, who are interested in self-interest rather than working for the common good. And perhaps I will bring you again here, Paul, because I know at the moment, I don't know how much you're able to say, but you are working on trying to bring together a broad alliance for change within the game. Somebody sort of said, we're always talking about changing Scottish football, but it never seems to change. Do you want to make a couple of very brief comments about that?
Yeah, I think behind the scenes, we've been working for quite some time on looking at parking the deficiencies and the problems that we know are there. We can talk about it forever. And part of the problem we highlighted it there, is the structures, but how do you change that? And it's not unique to us. If we look at what's happening in England just now, there's Our Beautiful Game, where David Bernstein, from former FA chairman, and Gary Neville, among others, are pushing towards getting reform. They believe, having worked 12 years through and Hannah will know some of this, the select committees of digital culture and media and sport, that there is no alternative apart from actually getting some sort of legislation. I think we're at a position where we would like to try and have a collective voice, encourage the football authorities to engage with us post the pandemic, but also look across the border and actually say, well, what's happening? How have they got to that position where they believe that football can't look after itself? And lots of people in the past, Simon, have said that, you know, if you look at many industries, most of the industries, they have some sort of control mechanism, some sort of regulator, they have some sort of ombudsman, but Scottish football, English football doesn't have it either, where, and if you look in the English context for a minute, you've got, you know, global people with global aspirations who are more interested. I was hearing a story today about a gambling commission report that we were privy to yesterday, that we were on, our chairman Andy Smith was on, and they were talking about the true value of the sponsorship of a Wolves shirt is £1 million. They currently get £8 million from a bookmaker who's doing illegal betting out of Cambodia into the Chinese market. So there's an example of money that is absolutely pouring into the game for all the wrong reasons, and nobody can control that because, you know, Wolves are an entity in themselves as a global brand. Now, we don't have those issues here in Scotland, but the same mechanisms and the same problems exist. Is how do you change when self-interest always dictates? I just cast your mind back and leave you with the voting scenario that Dundee put us in this situation a few months back, where it was absolutely scandalous. They voted one way and whatever. There was no repercussions. There was no discussion. There was no, you know, chief executive falling on his sword. It was just, well, we're a mess and we just accept it. What we need now, in summary, is we need a strategic vision going forward, and we need a plan for the whole of the game, the women's game, grassroots. Grassroots is going to be a disaster after this comes back. The mental health with kids, you know, the school football not being playing. Let's get it all together. Let's get as many people around the table as we can and come up with solutions. We all know the problems, but let's get together and work with some solutions.
Thanks, Paul. And perhaps I can abuse my position as chair and just remind people at the top of the chat, there's the address, the web address of the Scottish Football Supporters Association. It's free to join. Do join us and get involved in pushing for the kind of change that Paul is talking about. But you mentioned the sort of global context there, Paul. And so I want to come back to you, David, because you put down the massive challenge that's going to, you know, climate change is happening. It's not something that we can just bury our heads about. So I suppose my question is, you know, what does Scotland need to do about that is one question. And the other thing is, in terms of sort of global money in the game, is there any way in which we can also begin to address that issue, given the enormous disparities at a global level?
I mean, on the global question, it's not just global money that's the problem, it's global politics. I mean, it's not, you know, it's bad enough that you have dullards like the Glazers who own Manchester United, you know, to keep themselves in the style to which their mall business no longer delivers. But we've actually got the sovereign funds of, you know, the UAE, Qatar, potentially Saudi Arabia, owning football clubs for very, very explicitly political purposes. And I think the solution to that problem is that football clubs should not be privately owned. No football clubs anywhere should be privately owned. I find the whole idea that a football club, which is essentially a form of collective cultural capital generated by the interaction of fans, media and team, that generates narratives and symbols that actually make the thing important and significant. The idea that, you know, Roman Abramovich can come along and kind of sequester that is just completely morally and politically absurd. And I actually just think all football clubs should be taken into some form of, you know, German style social ownership. And, you know, take the 10%, take 10% of Chelsea's, you know, turnover every year, pay Abramovich off and give the shares to the Supporters Trust. And I think that goes for sort of Scottish privately owned clubs as well. And then keep, you know, that at least takes the politicians and some of the absurd billionaires out of the equation. I mean, in terms of climate change and Scottish football and what it means, I mean, 70% of sports carbon footprint is spectators. You know, after that, it's about mainly energy and food, but a huge amount of it is about spectators. And all football clubs, all sport needs to be just starting to think about that. You know, we need to be in a situation where every ticket for a football match, or indeed any sporting event, is free public transport. I mean, obviously, we need some really good public transport, you know, first and foremost. Similarly, you know, in terms of the siting and design of every sport and leisure facility, we've got to be thinking, how do people walk here? Where are the bike racks? I mean, it's all the basics. It's not kind of rocket science, but that needs to be absolutely front and center of all design, architecture, investment in all forms of sport, recreational and professional. And there are going to have to be some transfer mechanisms. I mean, I actually think, you know, we may get to the point where we need to move beyond voluntarism, you know, and where if a club wants to participate in a league, you know, often you have to go through a financial audit, as you do in Germany every year. It's like, have you got any money? No, you can't play. Well, it's, you know, we should also be saying, okay, have you got a carbon zero plan for the next decade? Are you on the case? You know, no, then you can't play. And I think this, you know, certainly in any kind of commercial sport. So there's a whole range of stuff to be done. I should also say it also may, you know, can bring some really great positives. This is not about making things more miserable. It's about making things better. You know, stadiums that are actually carbon positive because they've got an amazing kind of forest built on the roof. You know, leisure facilities rebuilt that are actually much easier to access by walking or on scooter or on the bike. You know, and above all, better food at football games. It doesn't all have to be really bad processed meat. Where is the hummus and falafel? That's what I'm saying. That's the best food I've ever eaten at football in East Jerusalem. Like, please bring it on. I've reached the point with football in England and Scotland. You know, if I'm hungry, it's better to stay hungry than to eat. Let's change that.
Oh,
Do the Kelly Pie will feel about that.
Sorry, what did you say there, Hannah?
I said, I don't know how the makers of the Kelly Pie will feel about that.
Yeah.
World famous.
Can the Kelly Pie and veganism coexist in some way? I'm veggie. I'm sort of halfway on that one. Listen, we've started to get really pretty radical actually about what needs to change, which I think is really important. And you know, change is about a number of things. When we launched the Scottish Football Supporters Association in 2015, the slogan that we used was "We believe in Scottish football." And the reason we used that slogan was that we have a suspicion that some of the people currently running the game don't really believe in it. They believe in survival, or they believe in it, you know, the broader game as an adjunct to just a couple of big clubs or something. But it's how you get that belief back. But Jerry, I want to bring you in on this question because in the past, I know you've talked about, well, for Scotland, you know, Scotland's democratic moment was in 2014. There might be another one coming. Is there a democratic moment for Scottish football? Is it really possible to radically change what we've got at the moment, given that everyone's saying we know how it needs to change, but at the moment there's a vested interest preventing that happening? What would a democratic moment for Scottish football mean?
I think there is. Just as a quick aside, I like David's point. I really like David's point about food and football. As somebody that did the 42 Scottish senior grounds, and then I've done about 60, 70 junior grounds when they were junior. The unremittingly, apart from the Killie Pie was still good when I was there, but the unremittingly terrible dietary offers at the senior 42. I mean, I think Celtic were one of the worst and also one of the most expensive. I mean, admittedly, nothing at the level of like English Premiership clubs in terms of food. But funnily enough, at the junior grounds, those were the best pies because they were most connected to local bakeries and local businesses that cared, i.e. their markets were quite like close to each other, you know, and et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of common sense when you think about it. Here's my thought about the democratic moment. I think we've already partly seen it and we need to learn from it. And and this is kind of quite a well-known story, but I don't think it's as understood as it should be. When Rangers went into liquidation in 2012, obviously what happened is the football authorities, driven by the let's keep the minimum, the guarantee of the staple of the 4 minimum Celtic Rangers league games a year. That's what the TV people want. That's what we can sell. That's what we understand. That's, it's that pessimistic view of the game. We rebelled. We as fans organised and rebelled and said to them, we don't want this. You're not doing it. It's the old style stitch up of the Blazers. And Rangers, in a moment that had hurt in it, and loss for Rangers fans, and a lot of us get that, Rangers had to start again in the 4th tier. And then something really interesting happened, apart from the fact, lots of lower league grounds were shown live each year, Glebe Park, Station Park, Brechin, Forfar, packed. And these grounds I'd never seen TV cameras for, I don't know, at least a decade, apart from maybe BBC Alba and Margo's brilliant football coverage. And I just thought that was fantastic, having visited all those grounds and knowing them as wonderful, welcoming places. And that was something that was a real, I think, democratic kind of like football spring. What it showed is that when fans organise, it's how you then develop it into sustainable platforms, as we've been seen talking about. And I also think it played a role into the independence referendum, because the organising was online, etc., and played a role in the DIY version of the Indie Ref. And to conclude with this, not to get too political about it, but I remember after the independence referendum, I was explaining this to one of the chief strategists of the SNP, who happens to be a passionate football fan. I'm talking about Rangers, saying it's not about football, it's about power, blah, blah, blah. And he said to me, you're not talking to me about football, are you? You're talking to me about power and who has legitimacy in Scotland. I said, of course I am talking to you about football, but I'm not really just talking to you about football. And the point that he didn't understand that as a football fan and didn't understand the connection between football and the Indie Ref makes me think that, I'm trying not to be too sweeping here, but a large part of people with institutional power in our country really don't know the Scotland that they're claiming to govern, really. And that is one of our problems. I think Scottish society is miles ahead of the institutions in this country. And that is one of our paradoxes and challenges, not just in football, but the big questions.
Indeed, and I mean the same has been said about the way football is governed is way behind where the fans are and want it to be, which is very important. I mean, Jerry, you've mentioned a number of issues. I want to bring Margo back on media in a moment, but just before I do that, to note some important comments coming through. John Scott says, "Don't dare knock the Alloa pie roll." And Robin Hall is commending the best pie I had was at Norwich. That was due to Delia. So,
what is the Alloa pie roll? I'm really intrigued.
Well, there you
it's
go.
It's a pie in a roll, I believe. I also believe it's a good Fife tradition.
Right. Hannah's got a bit of expertise on catering around football. She might come in on that moment. But Margo, if I can come to you on the question of media. I mean, I suppose I've been a supporter of Dumbarton for a dreadfully long time, over 50 years in fact, but I actually moved to Scotland 11 years ago, and I was absolutely shocked by how difficult it is to watch any team, certainly any team outside the top flight on football. Albert does a fantastic job and so on, but it's trying to get media attention for Scottish football, and therefore, particularly for kids, because if they don't see it on telly or on the internet or whatever, it doesn't quite exist in the same way. What can we do to improve the sort of media profile of Scottish football to generate some extra energy?
I think Simon, COVID again has given us an opportunity, because I think now that the broadcasters, certainly the bigger broadcasters, are investing the tens of millions of pounds, see that these arenas aren't the same tools anymore. They don't have 50, 60,000 fans packed into a stadium that spurs them on to enable them to sell further sponsorship, etc., etc. I think they can understand that broadcasting maybe has to have a different approach. And I think there's a real opportunity to do that in a different way. I'm not sure what the answer is to how we do that, but we have established that digital is an element that works. Okay, there are some issues with control, quality control, and productivity, and it's not really for everybody. However, it does provide access that some people have been excluded to. And if we really want to look at, you know, an all-encompassing and all open Scotland, think about the climate change, you know, we don't really want everybody traipsing off to a stadium every week, do we? But we do want people to be part of Scottish football, and that Scottish tradition that we had, our Saturdays 3 o'clock, which I talked about earlier. There's got to be a new one. There's got to be a different one that allows broadcasting to bring football to people's homes in a different way. You know, the broadcasters are going to have to talk to people and not demand exclusivity. Everything can't be behind a paywall. We need to ensure that people have access, and if they can't do it in a safe manner in stadiums, then let's find a way in which they can.
Yeah, I mean, there are something, I mean, View from the Terrace, I know they came along and they filmed kids at Dumbarton, and that made an absolutely massive impact. But the programme does seem to have had a problem recognising the existence of women sometimes. You see, you know, just male panels and so on. But those kind of community engaged ways of getting the media involved and presenting the game in a different light are really important. I'm struggling to keep up with all the fabulous stuff happening in chat. Those of us who are watching this through Eventbrite can see that. Those who are watching it on Twitter and YouTube can't, which is why I'm trying to relay the comments. But somebody, Barbara Young, has said fans' ownership is the way forward. And she said it seems to be close to completion at Hearts and its fans. Paul Goodwin may be able to expand on this. And indeed, Paul himself has made a comment. Armageddon without Rangers in the SPFL, Doncaster and Regan said. And that didn't happen, but you know, where are we on community ownership in trying to, you know, move in a different direction with football, Paul?
Thanks, Simon. Yes, community ownership is an opportunity. David already alluded to the German model. What's also, and David will know this, I'm sure, as somebody who's interested in the world game, that places like Argentina, Uruguay, many in Brazil are all continue to be community-owned clubs. And if you actually look at the history of most of those clubs in those countries, they were actually the Scots and the English who were actually over there, you know, and manual workers setting these clubs up, or some of the public schools as well. And they've continued the tradition very much like Queen's Park, you know, had here, where it was one member, one vote. And that still continues to this day. Germany's a more sophisticated system where it's allowed the 50+1, where you have the opportunity to have business involvement. And that's really, really encouraging, because it's a wider community. It tends to be local businesses proximate to the clubs. And it's been really, really positive. But again, in Germany, that's under threat. You know, we've seen in recent years with the Red Bull coming into the market, trying to act as a disruptor. But in Scotland, I think it's really strong. It's really powerful. There have been some where it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked at Dundee. It was meant to happen at Hibs, supposedly, but it didn't happen. The Americans come in, and again, the power of the dollar outweighed Tom Farmer's legacy of trying to give it to the fans. There are challenges, don't get me wrong, you know, in terms of you know, what happens and how the economics of it work. But done well, as we've seen that clubs like Motherwell, it is a rip-roaring success. And the biggest things that the benefit is the engagement with the community, the increase in community involvement, everybody contributing financially and emotionally to it, everybody pulling together, and the democratization of the game. Every member of the board at Motherwell is actually a Well Society member. You can't be on the board unless you're actually part of the fans group. But they have senior bankers, senior QC, they have a senior person, you know, all sorts of different industries. And what the football industry forgets is we're all out there. You know, this isn't like the past where, you know, 10% of the population went to university. I think the last time it was over 50%. You know, people are well educated, understand the economics, they understand the social fabric of the game, and you've got to tap in and use that. And done well, I think there's huge opportunities, but don't get me wrong, there's challenges as well. And you know, so often it's those challenges are the problems.
Indeed, there are. And I wanted to punt a question in your direction, Hannah, on that one. And let me give you a bit of warning of it, because I realise you're a Westminster MP. Football is devolved to Scotland. I appreciate you probably don't want to get involved in too much conversation about what the Scottish Parliament should be doing. But on the other hand, it's been noticeable down south that the Westminster Parliament has started to be prepared to put the football authorities under much more pressure on issues like transparency, governance, and so on. That hasn't really happened. Do you think there's a way of doing that in Scotland? I mean, obviously, one appreciates that politicians and governments in particular, don't want to be accused of interfering, but on the other hand, pressure is needed in that direction. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that rather difficult question.
No, and I'm happy to be very open. And whilst I shouldn't and won't make policy on the hoof, I have to say, on a personal level, I'm very attracted to the prospect and seeing the fans and folks speaking in the chat, the notion of community ownership. I think is a really good one, and it's something that I will happily take to my party and to my leadership and press them on it, because we're in manifesto writing territory at the moment. And yeah, I do sit at Westminster, so I have seen, and I play on the women's parliamentary football team, and that's a cross-party group of women, including folk like Tracy Crouch, who've been really strong advocates for the game, but also against the gambling lobby. And you'll remember that Tracy famously, and I think with significant integrity, resigned over the fact that the Chancellor wasn't bringing forward the proposals on fixed odd betting terminals. So whilst it's a pretty adversarial and often a pretty grim atmosphere down there, we do work together on issues that are common, and sport is 100% one of those issues. So I would say yes, at Westminster we've had there's been a much more robust criticism. I think the issues are similar, and at times been more profound in the English FA, but Westminster's taken on a key role in challenging that. And you're right, I don't think the Scottish Parliament has, and I don't think the Scottish Government has, and I think we do need to be bolder about that. And the SFA have got away with things that we need to, I think, be stronger with them on. And my sense of our new sports minister, and obviously we're in the middle of a global pandemic, but I've had a chat with her particularly about the women's stuff, is that she takes a serious interest in this, and these are things that she is concerned about. And money was given, by my understanding of the situation in terms of the women's game and the women's elite game, which people have asked about specifically, and I am about to ask more questions, but money was given by the Scottish Government to the SFA for the women's elite game, and it does not appear to have been used. I'm saying that with the caveat of I might have that wrong, but the information that I have and the questions that I've sought at the moment point to the fact that there's been a failing somewhere, and we need to get to the bottom of that. But longer term, I think you're absolutely right. I think we need to, I know politics and sport don't always go, but when it's for the greater good, and when, as people have rightly said, you're looking at the potential collapse of clubs, collapse of the grassroots structure, and then what are we left with? A couple of big clubs who rely on their brand and rely on importing players rather than a grassroots game that everybody's invested in. And I think that's got to be the goal. That's got to be what we're aiming for. And I think there'll be cross-party support for that. I don't see there being, it being something that would be particularly divisive. So yeah, I'll certainly push my colleagues in government and do everything I can as an individual politician, but also, working with others.
Yeah, that's great, Hannah, and I'm sure you're right. It is actually possible around football change issues to build cross-party alliances, which really helps everybody. When it's
you can lobby us as well. I think that's an important thing to say, is you as individuals and as organisations and as clubs. If people believe in community ownership, get onto your local politician and say, what are you putting in your manifesto for the Scottish election? What do you believe in? Because it's political pressure like that and proper organised campaigns that actually makes politicians stop and be like, right, there's really a head of steam around this. We should, it's obviously for the greater good, and a lot of energy has been understandably taken up with COVID, and it is where all our minds are focused. But this is there's a clear link here in terms of how we recover post-COVID and how our communities and our clubs recover. And I think that it's a very good idea.
Yep. Well, thanks for
Hopefully
that.
that's a
I mean, I
straight enough
think
answer.
one of the things that may affect the difference between down south and Scotland on that is that, you know, with the English Premier League being so full of money and such high profile, you know, it gets attention. Perhaps sometimes what we forget in Scotland is that actually football does play a really important part in the economy and local communities and so on. It's not quite so headline driven, but nevertheless it's more important, and it's great that people are grabbing onto that.
If I can make one brief point, because I know I've gone on a bit, but Margo made some really important points, as did others, in terms of the media. And I think the media plays a key role in finding new outlets and using new media. Amazon, somebody mentioned, I think is a really important way. You know, you look at the US and the way they have college sports structured, and yes, paywalls are challenging, and I'm, you know, frankly really pissed off that the match on Sunday is behind a paywall. It's not being broadcast on Kunsel Telly. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it ought to be something for everybody and not just for the fans of those two clubs. Folks, time is really rolling on. We've had a great discussion. I should also say that Robin Hall has mentioned going to US baseball match and learning to market and sell the game and so on. This is something that Paul Goodwin's been very, very involved in. But we are going to need to wind up this discussion anyway. Hopefully, I mean, this material will be made available through Luath Press, through the Scottish Football Supporters Association. The conversation will go on, and there's an opportunity to get involved in working and pressing on the issues that we've discussed. But before, just a few concluding remarks and a reminder about how you can get a special discount on Scotland After the Virus tonight. Before I say that, I just want to go to each of our panel in the order that we started with and say, do you have a final... Well, unfortunately, we haven't really got a minute, but if you've got a final sort of soundbite, something that you want to leave as your impression from this conversation and your sign of where we need to go in future. Paul, start with you on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Simon, and thanks everybody for your time tonight. I think more than anything, we love the game. We're passionate about the game. We care about the game. We all want the best for it. And I think, you know, football can't fix itself. It's for us to fix it. It's our game. It's often been said, and it's for every single component part. You know, it's back to the strength in all of us working together to actually say, what do we want for Scottish football going forward? And very soon, I hope to, you know, we will be helping evolve something that will help fans, you know, no matter who they are in the game, or whether they're club officials or referees or players, former players, actually signpost some of the feelings that they have for it. We have to look positive. We have to look ahead. All elements of the game, they're all interlinked. You know, one of the great comments that we have, you know, I remember it's been said by many people, international players. The bottom line is every player that started kicking a ball started at grassroots, and we should never lose sight of that fact. And we've got to look from the very top to the very bottom, and from the very bottom to the very top. And I hope that we can help this.
Thanks, Paul. That's a great rallying cry. Margo, a quick comment from you. Just need to...
I did that thing that everybody says don't do. Very quick from me, I just want to say whatever we do at whatever table, the very, very fundamental important thing for me is to make sure that women are involved in that conversation, that the women's game is treated with respect, and that young girls and women have a legacy to look forward to, and that they're not denied it by chauvinism.
Thanks, Margo. Absolutely agree with that. Fantastic. Hannah, last comment from you?
See what Margo said. I think I've said enough. But yes, I mean, hold us to account. You know, we're elected to positions of power as politicians, and you know, as I said before, I know politics and sport doesn't always necessarily go that well, but if you want change, you know, demand it, knock on our doors, lobby us, and put pressure on us. I will continue pushing, but I think it's really important that my colleagues in the Scottish Government and my party and other parties in the Parliament hear what your views are, and take cognizance of them, get them to table for a debate, get them to discuss it openly, because there's a lot to do.
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks for what you're doing. David?
Just to reiterate, I guess that, you know, everything after the virus is about the climate emergency and climate change. And football can play a small but really significant role in that. And that I pledge, when travel is possible again for these purposes, to try and allow a pie roll. What a complete concept.
Absolutely, you'll be welcome at Recreation Park. Well done, that's great. Jerry, last comment from you.
Okay, 2 points. One is, when we talk about ownership, it's great to talk about fan ownership, but it's so related to capitalism and the unethical, offshore, dirty money version of British capitalism. So we can't change football without changing British capitalism. And my second point is that we haven't touched on enough, I think, tonight, just the tragedy and the outrage of the Scottish football authorities. They've left, you know, completely in the dark, Leagues 1 and 2, the Highland and Lowland League, the pyramid structure, and women's football. And on Monday, the SFA have a chance to either do the right thing and support those brilliant clubs, or the season is suspended, and also potentially the Scottish Cup. You know, Scottish Cup's only ever not been played during world wars. Those authorities don't look like they care about so much the Scottish game, and we demand better, really.
Thanks, Jerry. There's been a good rebellious spirit this evening, and we want to keep that going. We haven't been able to cover everything, but we've opened up some important issues. Somebody said, you know, we need more discussion of this, and so on. The Scottish Football Supporters Association is going to be a forum to do that and to organise for change. Last comment I need to make this evening is to thank everybody who's taken part, but especially our panel, Paul, Margo, Hannah, David and Jerry. Been a fantastic evening, I hope you agree. Many thanks as ever to the good folk at Luath Press, Gavin McDougall, Carrie Hutchison, Lauren Grieve, Daniel Meal and Jenny Renton. They've been absolutely fantastic. And your reward for this is that if you want a copy of Scotland After the Virus, a book that I think we can recommend, then you can get that. You can buy a copy by going to the Luath Press website and using the code SATV Social to get £2.99 off. So thank you everybody for taking part. Have a great rest of the evening and enjoy whatever pie you're going to have after this. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.